Back in November, Dominic started a worm bin down in our basement, and in today's video I wanted to talk about how he built the bin and where he got the worms from, how we're maintaining them, and why would you want worms in your apartment or house to begin with. To build the box, Dominic went to the local hardware store and he picked up a few plastic containers that had lids on them, and he drilled holes in the bottom and on the sides. So he did this for two reasons. One of them is ventilation, so that there will be air going in through the containers, and the other is for movement, so the worms can move from one section to the other.
And kind of we're just doing like a homemade version of the worm factory, which is a stacking system for worm composting. I bought 4 bins because the other system I was thinking about buying was 4 bins. Now the disadvantage for these is that they stack really well inside of each other. That means once I start stacking them, it's either going to be sitting on a bunch of material, or they'll sit inside of each other and kind of compress it more than I would have liked. But looking at some videos of the worm factory, it seems like the same thing happens there.
He started off with just dead leaves in one section of them, and the idea is once the worms kind of compost your food scraps and whatever you're putting in there, they'll kind of leave worm castings down there, and when they're done with all of that, they'll move to the next level up, and you'll be left with some really nice worm castings down in that level. And you can buy one of these pre-made, and they might be better. We're not really sure. Maybe we'll get another one next year and kind of compare the two. But for now, we just have the DIY one. So it's got different levels, but you can buy them pre-made. When we were in Prince George, Dominic asked out in a Facebook group if you can get some red wigglers, and someone obliged and very generously gave Dominic, I think, a pound of worms. And we actually got another offer afterwards. But when we moved here, Dominic asked on Facebook if anybody had any red wigglers, and there just wasn't any kind of available. There was a couple suggestions of what he could do. He can go to Canadian Tire and ask for fishing worms, or someone recommended he go to somebody who had a horse farm and dig through the manure. But he ended up ordering worms from Wormbox.ca, and this is a company that is in Quebec. And he ordered them, and they didn't get shipped right away. And when he contacted them, their customer service was really quick and really responsive. And what they do is they'll send them out on like a Monday or a Tuesday to make sure that the worms don't end up staying like over the weekend in the post office. And they'll also check the weather to make sure that it's not too cold when the worms are sent out, and they'll only send them out when they think that they'll get there in time and they won't kind of freeze to death on their way there. So he ended up ordering a pound of worms from Wormbox.ca to put into the bin that he had created. So when he got the worms, they came in their own little bit of worm casting, and this is really important because the castings that the worms came in were kind of an inoculation for the bin that he created to kind of create that kind of microbiome that he wanted for the worm castings. So he put them in with the dead leaves, and then to maintain them, we started adding food scraps. And the things that you want to add are like the organic kitchen wastes. You don't want to put like dairy or meat or anything really oily in there, but like fruit and vegetables and those kind of scraps. And if you blend them up, it's a little bit easier for the worms to kind of digest and eat and break down. So we would put them through the food processor and kind of dig a trench in the worm bin and cover it up so that they didn't get like full of bugs or smell or anything. And that's where we would feed the worms, about probably once a week. So blending the food is highly recommended because it increases the surface area of the food. And what the worms do is they don't eat the actual food, they eat the stuff that grows on the food as it kind of rots away. So the more surface area that can be rotted and available to grow, the better. So blending the food is really important. One of the problems that we encountered, I think, is that it was too cold down in the basement with the worm bin like directly on the floor. It's about 15 degrees down there, which is kind of as cold as you would want it to be. You wouldn't want it to be any colder. You'd probably want it to be a little bit warmer. So what we did was we took the worm bin and put it up onto, I think, a tire or something to keep it up off of the floor. I think like a pallet or tires, or really anything that keeps it up off the concrete floor if you have it in your basement is important, because I think our worm bin was a little bit too cold and the worms were not thriving, but now they're a lot bigger and they're thriving a lot more. We don't have a lot in the bin. So we are hoping over the next few weeks to see if we will get more worms. We did see like really big healthy worms when we looked into it today, and some cocoons that show that the worms are reproducing. So that is a good sign. I think that it was just a little bit too cold, and hopefully now they are doing a little bit better, but they're looking good down there. So the last thing that I want to talk about is, why would you want to have a worm bin in your house? And the worm castings are really great for fertilizer. You can buy worm castings to put in your plants or into your garden, depending on how many worms you get, and worms will double in size about every 3 months, I believe. So you can get a lot more, and you can get a lot more castings. But if you're gonna have just a bin in your like apartment or in your house, you might not have a lot of castings, but they're really good for your houseplants. You're gonna have them, and it's also something really great to kind of start composting your own kitchen scraps and kind of reduce your impact on the world rather than putting them in the garbage. It's a nice way to compost if you don't have a yard, or if you don't have kind of access to a place. Like we have our compost outside as well, but it is really nice to have the worm castings inside. Okay, so that is it for today. If you have any questions or comments or advice on our worm bin, as usual, I'm always taking advice. It is all solicited, please. You can leave them down in the comments below, and thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.